Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a forgotten piece of American history from way back in 1921. It's a true story, and it reveals what happens when a war doesn't really end. It just comes home to fester under a hot Arkansas sun.
Now, this story isn't about some grand battle. It's about a quiet, simmering conflict that begins not with a gunshot, but with the simple, hopeful act of planting seeds. This one sentence right here, it just captures the entire visceral drama we're about to unpack.
So let's meet our protagonist. He's a man caught between two worlds, a decorated but, deeply damaged veteran of the Great War named Private William Gasnell. He's desperately trying to build a new life, but he is absolutely haunted by the ghost of his past.
To really get Gasnell, you have to understand the two brutal realities he was trying to reconcile. See, he was a member of the Rock of the Marne, one of the most battle-hardened units in the entire U.S. Army. So after surviving the absolute hell of France, his garden wasn't just a hobby. No way, it was his therapy. It was his last stand against the chaos of his own trauma.
And this right here really visualizes that internal struggle perfectly. The very act of digging, which meant survival in the trenches, is completely transformed. Here in Arkansas, he's digging for peace, turning red clay into a future he hopes he can actually live in. He's literally repurposing the skills of war to try and cultivate a new life.
But Gasnell's garden, it wasn't planted in some peaceful, idyllic field. Nope, it was on the edge of Camp Pike, a place that in 1921 was anything but peaceful. It was a pressure cooker, just waiting to explode.
The camp itself was basically a central character in this whole drama. Just picture this, a massive military city built for 50,000 men, now just decaying and nearly empty, coated in this fine red dust. And it was filled with traumatized veterans who had no war left to fight, which created this huge collective crisis of purpose.
And let's be crystal clear about who these men were. They weren't fresh-faced recruits. They were the battle-hardened remnants of the 3rd Infantry Division, men who had survived some of the most brutal combat of the 20th century. So they were highly lethal, deeply damaged, and really prone to explosive violence. And adding to all this tension was a dark, open secret about what these very soldiers had recently done on American soil.
So back in 1919, troops from Camp Pike were sent to suppress what was called a Negro insurrection, which resulted in the indiscriminate killing of black sharecroppers. This event created this thick, oppressive atmosphere of guilt, and it made the local white population view the soldiers as a necessary evil, useful for enforcing the racial order, but a federal menace the second they started eyeing local land.
So this brings us to the central conflict, because the fight over a quarter-acre of vegetables wasn't really about vegetables at all. It was a brutal proxy war for much, much larger issues.
You see, the fight over this small garden was really a fight for survival, for authority, and for honor. For the locals, Gasnell was a federal occupier in a uniform, claiming their soil. Economically, in the middle of a deep recession, that garden meant food security for both parties. And for the Scott family, it was about defending their patriarchal authority under the Southern unwritten law, which basically sanctioned violence to defend one's home.
And this put Gasnell on a direct collision course with his estranged father-in-law, E.W. Scott. Now, Gasnell was separated from his wife, but he was still working the family land. To Scott, he wasn't family anymore. He was a military squatter, a parasite to be removed like a pest. But for Gasnell, that garden was his last claim to any kind of future.
Okay, so with this much pressure building up from every single direction, psychological, economic, and social, it was pretty much inevitable that the rising tension would just erupt into violence.
So on the morning of Thursday, May 5th, Gasnell gets an ultimatum from his father-in-law. Stay away from the farm. But Gasnell, he made the fateful decision to return that afternoon, armed with his service pistol to tend to his crop. And what followed was a violent confrontation that would change absolutely everything.
The confrontation was just brutal and chaotic. Words escalated to shouting, and E.W. Scott raised his shotgun. He and his son fired a total of 5 times. And Gasnell, the decorated combat veteran, he drew his pistol and emptied it. But in a state of panic, probably triggered by his trauma, he missed every single shot. He just fell to the ground, bleeding into the very soil he had tried so hard to cultivate.
And the details here, they tell you everything you need to know about the real nature of this attack. The Scots used birdshot, not buckshot. This wasn't a duel, it was an extermination meant to maim, to warn, and to humiliate. Gasnell was peppered with about 25 small wounds, painful for sure, but not intended to be fatal. For a hero of the Marne, being defeated this way, well, it was the ultimate degradation.
But believe it or not, the most shocking part of this story isn't the shooting itself, or even the humiliation. It's what happened next, in the cold, clear light of the local justice system.
The crucial point really comes down to a single number, $300. After nearly killing a decorated U.S. soldier, this was the value the local courts placed on the crime.
Yeah, a bond of just $300 each. This shockingly low amount exposed a massive justice gap. It sent a clear and brutal message about the perceived value of a soldier's life in a community he both protected and occupied. It answered the question of who truly belonged and who was just an outsider in a uniform.
And in the end, that's what Gasnell's story really becomes, right? It's a powerful deconstruction of the whole returning hero myth. He survived the industrial slaughter of the Great War in France, only to lose the peace in his own backyard. This quote says it all. He was a warrior who was just trapped, unable to fight his way to victory or plant his way to a lasting peace.
And that really brings us to today. Even though this story is a century old, the questions it raises are just timeless. It's a stark reminder that for so many veterans, the war doesn't just end when they come home. That fight to cultivate a simple garden of peace can become its own unwinnable battle.